Welcome to the latest edition of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and we're covering Scientology. I've got my big S shirt on for Scientology. I know it's Superman, but it's the best I could do. And today we are going to be talking about the methodology of Scientology. Now, the last video, I covered the goal of Scientology, which is to get clear. Going clear is basically ridding yourself, or with the help of an auditor, being rid of all of the bad programming that you have accumulated in your subconscious reactive mind that only really records information when you're either unconscious or in pain or in some other traumatic or shocking situation where your conscious mind has kind of shut off or been put on pause. In those situations, your ears are still picking up, your senses are still picking up impressions all around you, and they could potentially program you in ways that are detrimental to you later on. Like the example I gave in the last video was of a man who was wounded and was told while he was unconscious, he overheard someone saying, this guy, when he wakes up, he might not be able to see. And sure enough, when the guy woke up, he was psychosomatically blind. And he had to be psychologically restored to sight. So a lot of Scientology deals with trying to get this programming out. It also has to do with getting rid of the energy or charge that comes from going through a traumatic experience. So if you are in a high pressure situation and you have an emotional connection with the memory of that situation, that's called a charge. And part of the auditing process is not just going through and logically figuring out what your associations are with the programming in your reactive mind, but also getting rid of that charge. Now, the auditing process involves this thing called an e-meter. An e-meter is basically kind of like a lie detector in that it checks the galvanic response on your skin and will detect if you have any kind of electrochemical response to your remembering or recounting a series of events. Now, how does this play through in the auditing process itself? And what does it mean to be audited? Well, auditing is kind of like therapy. It's not exactly the same, but because the auditing process deals with what Scientology calls tech. Tech would be the types of therapeutic techniques that are available to Scientologists and which have been codified and refined and were refined by L. Ron Hubbard over decades to make them better and make them more precise so that auditors could essentially follow a script of what to do when you have a person come to you in need of auditing, in need of this having this need to get to the root of whatever bad programming is stuck in their reactive mind and get it out. And additionally, to get rid of the charge that is associated with the past traumas that built in this bad programming. So what a auditor will do is follow what is called the general rule of auditing. The general rule of auditing is that in order to get rid of a persistent condition that is unwanted, the person with the condition has to fully view, fully confront that situation that generated the condition, even if it's something that goes all the way back to the womb, when you're floating in the amniotic fluid, but you're still able to pick up sense impressions from outside the womb, say hearing the voices of adults around, and then later on when you develop language skill, knowing what they said and how that could manifest in you. But more more often than not, it's probably things that happened during your childhood, traumatic experiences that you may have had, injuries that you may have received, and the careless things that people had said around you when you were in a reactive mind kind of condition where you would be picking up such words and phrases as programming instead of putting them in your analytical mind, your normal conscious mind, and being able to say, oh, well, they're just saying stuff. You don't have that kind of analytical wherewithal when you're in a traumatized state. So, auditing, the job of the auditor is to take you back through those traumatic experiences and do what in the psychological world would be a sort of exposure therapy to your memory of those happenings. An example of exposure therapy, just so that you have something to work with, Jordan Peterson, when he was talking about exposure therapy with a woman who was deathly afraid of elevators. She had a phobia about elevators, would not want to get into one to save her life. And so what he did was he would first bring her within 20 feet of an elevator and have her watch it from a distance. Have her, see it open and close and see people get on and get off and just watch it. And then that would be it. That would be enough for that particular session. And then the next time, he would take her and he would bring her 10 feet in front of the elevator and then just have her stand there and have her watch it. And so she would be afraid, but, she's afraid at a distance. She knows she's safe. So she's able to kind of acclimatize herself to it, acclimate herself to it. And then the next time he would have her right there next to the elevator. And she'd, get open up, close, people get on, people get off. She can see all of its workings up close. And then finally, she's able to actually get in the elevator and go up or down a floor. So, or maybe the first time she walks in, she walks out, and then lets the doors close, and that's it. Walks in, walks out, just to get that part down, and then you can take it up or down a floor, whatever the gradient, the general gradient steps are, because what that kind of exposure therapy does is it lessens the emotional tension of being around what it is you're afraid of. You get exposed to it piece by piece. It's almost like, in these COVID times, it's almost like vaccination, where you're getting a little bit of exposure and taking that into yourself, and your body's able to generate kind of an immunity to the fear of that thing of which you're afraid. You build up a little bit of tolerance, and then as you keep going, you build up more and more tolerance until finally you can tolerate the whole thing. So, in the same way, in a similar way, a lot of the auditing process involves taking you back, returning you to a point in time at which you received bad programming, some traumatic event. And sometimes it takes a lot to uncover it, so there's a lot of talk therapy that goes on. But in general, you go back to a time that you were traumatized, and you recall the memory as though you were there, reliving the experience again. And as you're doing that, what's happening inside you is that you're connecting with the charge associated with that trauma, and you're able to release some of that charge. And then the auditor will take you back and say, okay, let's go over from the beginning again. And then you go and you recount and you, again, try to the best of your recollection, re-experience the traumatic event, the painful event, the circumstances under which you received the bad programming, and then you burn off even more charge. And the objective is to get you to the point of being clear of any charge that remains on that set of memories. And once that happens, once you've let loose of all the emotional energy that is connected to that memory, then you can go back to that memory anytime you want, and you're not going to be harmed by it. And moreover, if there are any falsehoods or any bad programming that was wrapped in with that traumatic experience, you can let go of it now because there's no more charge binding that to you in your mind. So the process of being audited is to basically go through your life and find all of those occasions where you received bad programming, recounting those occasions to the best of your ability so that you can release any of the charge that was built up around your memories of those occasions, and then finally being able to let go of any bad programming that was associated with the traumatic situations. And you just keep going through that process, and maybe you go further back in your life until you hit the womb, and then you're progressing all the way forward through your life until you reach the present day, and eventually you get to a point where you are completely clear. And that is the goal of Scientologists. Now, everybody wants to hit clear. Now, there are levels beyond clear. They're called the operating thetan levels. Theta being a sort of analogous term for spirit. So there are levels of progression. Clear is not the end of the story. You can go up to these operating operating thetan levels 1 through 8. And when you're at 8, you're at like God level or something like that. What you're supposed to be able to do at that point, I don't know. It sounds fairly impressive, but I have no idea how many people have actually even gotten there. So one of the things that I wanted to share in regards to this auditing process is how I actually went through a similar situation in my own life, an auditing-like process in my own life. And I did it through the use of high school yearbooks. I have like, every time in high school, and maybe I need to tell you this for non-U.S. countries or something like that. Maybe it's the same everywhere. But in the high school and middle schools where I went through, 6th grade all the way up through my senior year of high school, my last year of what we would call secondary education, I purchased one of the yearbooks, which basically shows all of pictures of all of the kids in the classes, the various grades, and also, kind of recounts things that they were involved in, things that happened that year, just candid shots of kids in various situations. And I think it was maybe during my Christian period when I was trying to achieve a state of forgiveness with my past, where I was either forgiving people in my past or seeking forgiveness from people in my past. And in order to do that, I needed some sort of help to guide me through all of these connections that I had to my teenage years that I couldn't fully emotionally explore without a reference guide. And so those yearbooks became my reference guide. And what I would do with those yearbooks is I would go from picture to picture of every student in those yearbooks, and I would, as I encountered their pictures, I would first see if there was a student I even recognized, but if I did recognize the student, did I have any kind of emotional connection to that student, to that fellow classmate of mine from way back when? Still, to this day, did I have some sort of tie that I had yet to loose? And if I did, then I had to emotionally resolve that in some way, shape, or form. Um, Sometimes it meant going back and contacting some of the classmates from long ago. Sometimes it just meant releasing the pent up emotion and energy, much like in Scientology, it would be releasing a charge. Uh, Sometimes it was emotional to the point of screaming out loud at untapped recesses of emotion that were stored up in me from years ago that I had no idea were there because I had totally forgot about some of the people who were in the yearbook. I remember one time I saw a picture of a girl in the yearbook, and I had forgotten completely about her, even though I used to sit right beside her in one of my classes. It was overwhelming when I saw her picture because it was just a memory that I had stored away and had never accessed in years. And the emotions that just came flooding out at that point were just, it was amazing. And, but at the end of the process, I came through and I felt, for lack of a better word, clear of all of the baggage that I had been holding onto from high school, you know? And that it kind of leads me to think that, yeah, Scientology has actually got its head screwed on pretty straight when it comes to the notion of all of the emotional baggage that we could be carrying around inside of us that we could let loose of if only we were willing to confront our memories of those experiences, our memories of those times, honestly and to the fullest extent possible. And I do think that there are people who I've encountered in life who are suffering today largely because they will not confront to the fullest extent of their ability the traumas that have happened to them in their lives. Now, one of the tenets of Scientology is that if you can at least partially confront your memories of these events, then the intensity of your feelings attached to those events will lessen. You will bleed off at least some of the charge, even if you don't get rid of it altogether, which is why auditors will generally take you through the same sequence of events multiple times until, by looking at the e-meter reading and checking, your responses on that, how the needle wavers whenever you're going through that, what they want is to get you to a point where the needle doesn't move as you are recounting your memories. I think that kind of technique would be very useful to run on some of the people who I've encountered who have experienced traumas early in their lives. And that is, one of the things that makes me so curious about Scientology, even though I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole on account of all the cultish behavior that they engage in. Things like keeping a file on you your whole life, that has everything in it that you've ever told an auditor. Things like, keeping track of all of your associations and discouraging you from seeing friends and families who are not who are not sympathetic with Scientology. You hear horror stories, things that have happened to people who have left Scientology and the people around them who have suffered on account of that. And, so Scientology, it's not something that I am advising that anybody get into. The other thing to understand is that the auditing process can be expensive as hell. I went and I just did some quick casual lookups of, how much does it cost to be audited? Because these are basically therapy sessions. And if you've ever had to pay for therapy, you'll know that you're looking at, in general, you're probably looking anywhere from, $50 to $100 an hour for regular outpatient mental health therapy, just, out and about in the real world. If you're talking about the Church of Scientology, though, I mean, you're looking at $100 an hour minimum, and you're also paying for blocks of multiple hours of auditing. So you're probably throwing down chunks in advance of $800 to $1,200, maybe more, at a go to get yourself on the way to clear. And I saw one estimate that said you might spend as much as $128,000 just getting to clear, and that's before you get to any of these like operating Thetan levels. So, gosh, it's a lot. It's a lot, and it can cost you even more if you at some point decide this is not for you and you want to leave the church. You might suffer some social and financial costs, uh, costs and harassment on top of that. So, yeah, I cannot recommend, even as much as I'm curious about, because let me tell you, I actually was reading through the material and thinking to myself, my gosh, I would probably love to go through a course of auditing, just to see if there's anything still residing in me that's so totally screwed up but buried so deep that I haven't gotten to it. But I just won't. That's just not something I'm going to do. So even though I'm trying to bring out for you, like I said a couple of videos back, I'm trying to bring out some of the truth that Scientology bears in the course of its activities. I'm not making a recommendation to anyone. I'm not saying that Scientology overall is a positive thing that anyone should seek to get involved with. I mean, your decisions are your own. My general advice is to stay away, just because of all the bad things I've heard about it. But, your mileage may vary. I can't control what you do on that. I just know that in my case, if I ever want to go through that kind of therapeutic work, I'm just going to go to a therapist. I'm going to go to a therapist who I can quit at any time and not have to worry about, repercussions that are extraordinarily unusual, the kind that I've heard are associated with Scientology. So as far as the auditing process goes, that's pretty much all I've got to relate. This has been Don't Take This as Gospel, and please subscribe so that you can catch the next video, and I will talk to you later.